Something interesting just happened in the ongoing conversation surrounding author Colleen Hoover and the chaos tied to the film adaptation of It Ends With Us. After months of public controversy, speculation, and legal drama connected to the movie starring Blake Lively and directed by Justin Baldoni, Hoover appeared in a televised interview with Jenna Bush Hager on The Today Show. The interview was meant to promote her newest writing projects, but it quickly reignited debates that have been following Hoover for months. For viewers already aware of the drama surrounding the film adaptation and the legal dispute tied to it, the conversation raised more questions than answers. Instead of clarifying the situation, several of Hoover's statements seemed to contradict earlier comments she had made publicly, which is why the interview has drawn so much attention online. During the discussion, Hoover spoke about her relationship with writing and how it has functioned as a personal outlet throughout her career. She described the process as something deeply private, explaining that writing often involves isolating herself from everything else in order to focus completely on the story. According to Hoover, the act of writing has always served as a form of emotional release and even a kind of therapy for her. She explained that returning to writing after a period of focusing on other projects felt refreshing and necessary. This return, she said, was part of what motivated her to revisit an idea she had originally written many years ago, which eventually developed into her newer psychological thriller titled Woman Down. The novel centers on a fictional author named Petra Rose, a character who retreats to a remote cabin while struggling with writer's block after experiencing a damaging wave of public backlash related to a film adaptation of her own book. The premise immediately caught attention because of how closely it appears to mirror Hoover's own recent experiences. Over the past few years, Hoover has been at the center of intense public conversation following the massive success of her novels, particularly after It Ends With Us was adapted into a major Hollywood film. The movie generated huge box office attention and strong audience turnout, but it also sparked a wave of criticism and public debate that has continued long after the release. In the interview, Hoover emphasized that readers should not interpret the protagonist of Woman Down as a reflection of her own life. She explained that while the character happens to share the same profession as she does, the story itself is not meant to represent her personal experiences or her own beliefs. Hoover even noted that when authors write about characters who share aspects of their profession or lifestyle, it can easily lead audiences to assume the story is autobiographical. Because of that, she said it was important for her to clarify early on that the character was fictional and not a disguised version of herself. However, the timing and the storyline naturally invited comparisons. The character in the novel faces backlash after a film adaptation of her work triggers controversy, something that closely resembles the real-world situation Hoover experienced following the release of the It Ends With Us movie. That film became one of the most talked-about adaptations of a contemporary romance novel in recent years. Originally published in 2016, the book gained massive popularity on platforms like TikTok, particularly through the Book Talk community, which dramatically increased its sales years after its original release. Despite its success, the adaptation also became wrapped in unexpected off-screen conflict. Reports and legal disputes involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni began circulating after the movie premiered, pulling the project into the middle of tabloid coverage and online debates. For Hoover, this meant that one of the most successful projects of her career was suddenly being discussed not only for its story, but also for the controversy surrounding its production and aftermath. During the interview, Hoover spoke about how difficult it had been to navigate that sudden shift. She acknowledged that seeing a deeply personal project become tied to public drama was challenging, but she also stressed that she still felt proud of the film and the team involved in making it. According to Hoover, the overwhelming response from readers and audiences during the movie's opening period reminded her why the story resonated with people in the first place. Even as the surrounding controversy grew louder, she said she tried to focus on the positive reception and the impact the story had on viewers who connected with its themes.
At the same time, the interview revealed how much the entire experience had affected Hoover's relationship with public life. She explained that at one point, she intentionally stepped back from social media because of several frightening privacy incidents. According to Hoover, people had begun showing up outside her home, and the attention extended not only to her, but also to her family members and colleagues. That level of scrutiny, she said, transformed what had once felt like a positive connection with readers into something far more overwhelming. The shift marked a major change for an author whose career had grown largely through direct interaction with readers online. Hoover had previously been known for maintaining an active presence with fans, frequently discussing her books and upcoming projects on social media platforms. But as the attention surrounding the film adaptation intensified, the tone of the conversation around her work began to change. What started as excitement about a best-selling novel being brought to the big screen gradually evolved into a complicated mix of praise, criticism, speculation, and legal headlines. And by the time Hoover sat down for this interview, it was clear that the story surrounding It Ends With Us had become much bigger than the book itself.
As the conversation continued, the focus inevitably shifted back to the project that placed Colleen Hoover at the center of global attention, the film adaptation of It Ends With Us. The book had already been enormously successful long before the movie existed, but its adaptation introduced an entirely new level of scrutiny. What had once been a best-selling novel suddenly became the subject of headlines, legal filings, and intense online debate, largely tied to the high-profile conflict involving Blake Lively and Justin Baldoni. During the interview, Hoover acknowledged that the situation surrounding the movie had been complicated. She explained that while the outside noise had been difficult, she still tried to view the project through the lens of its success and the effort that went into making it. According to Hoover, the film's opening reception and the audience turnout reminded her that the story had reached a large number of readers and viewers who felt deeply connected to it. She described feeling proud of the final product and praised the cast and crew who helped bring the story to life on screen. For Hoover, that pride was rooted in the fact that the story behind It Ends With Us had always carried emotional weight. Over the years, she has repeatedly explained that the novel was loosely inspired by experiences connected to her mother's life and her exposure to domestic violence while growing up. The book follows Lily Bloom, a young woman who becomes trapped in an abusive relationship while struggling to reconcile love with the need to break cycles of harm. The subject matter helped the novel resonate with many readers, particularly those who saw reflections of their own experiences in the story. But the transition from page to screen introduced new layers of interpretation and public attention. Film adaptations inevitably attract wider audiences than books alone, and with that wider audience often comes stronger scrutiny. Once the movie debuted, discussions quickly spread across social media platforms, entertainment outlets, and fan communities. The conversation was no longer limited to the narrative itself. It now included casting choices, marketing decisions, behind-the-scenes tensions, and eventually the legal dispute that drew headlines months after the film's release. In the interview, Hoover suggested that separating the art from the surrounding controversy had become an important coping strategy for her. She explained that while the public narrative around the movie had grown complicated, she still tried to focus on the creative achievement of seeing one of her novels turned into a major motion picture. For a writer whose career began independently, watching a story evolve from a manuscript written in solitude to a full-scale film production was a milestone she did not want to lose sight of. At the same time, the conversation touched on how dramatically the experience had changed her relationship with the public. Hoover admitted that the intense spotlight made it difficult for her to continue engaging online the way she once had. She described a period where even simple activities, like recommending books or interacting with readers, felt stressful because any comment could quickly become part of a larger online debate. That environment, she suggested, contributed to her decision to step away from social media for a while.
The change was significant because Hoover's rise as an author was closely tied to the digital reading community. Platforms like TikTok played a major role in turning her older novels into viral bestsellers years after their initial publication. Readers frequently shared emotional reactions to her stories, and those videos introduced millions of new readers to titles that had already been in circulation for years. In many ways, the internet had helped transform Hoover from a successful author into one of the most recognizable names in contemporary romance publishing. Yet, the same digital ecosystem that fueled her success also amplified the controversies surrounding the film adaptation. Every interview, public comment, or rumor could spread rapidly across social platforms, generating waves of interpretation and criticism. For Hoover, that environment made it increasingly difficult to control the narrative around her work. During the interview, she reflected on how strange it felt to see something that began as a personal creative project evolve into such a large cultural conversation. The story had started as a book written privately, then gradually expanded into a global phenomenon through reader enthusiasm. But once the Hollywood adaptation entered the picture, the scale of attention changed dramatically. What had once been discussions among readers now involved entertainment media, legal experts, and audiences far beyond the traditional book community. Despite all of that, Hoover indicated that she still believed the film adaptation accomplished something meaningful. She pointed out that many viewers had shared stories about how the book and the movie helped them process difficult experiences or recognize unhealthy patterns in relationships. Hearing those responses, she said, reminded her why the story mattered in the first place. Even so, it was clear that the journey from best-selling novel to controversial film adaptation had reshaped the way Hoover approached both her career and her public presence. By the time the interview reached its later moments, the discussion began shifting toward what she planned to do next, both as a writer and as someone navigating an industry that had suddenly become far more complicated when she first started publishing her books. And that question about the future opened the door to another revealing card of the conversation.
By the final portion of the interview, the conversation moved away from the controversy itself and toward what the future might look like for Colleen Hoover. After spending much of the discussion reflecting on the turbulence surrounding the film adaptation of It Ends With Us, Hoover began speaking about returning to the part of her career that started everything in the first place: writing. She explained that her next goal is simple: getting back to work on a new book. After a period dominated by publicity, legal headlines, and the overwhelming attention that came with a major film release, Hoover suggested that she wants to shift her focus back to storytelling. For someone who built her career by writing intensely personal novels in isolation, that return to the creative process represents a kind of reset. Writing, she reiterated, has always been the space where she feels most comfortable, away from the noise of public debate and speculation. The timing of that reset is significant. Over the last decade, Hoover has evolved from a self-published author into one of the most commercially successful writers in contemporary fiction. Many of her novels, including titles like Verity, Ugly Love, and It Ends With Us, have reached massive global audiences. Much of that success came years after their original publication, thanks to the surge of reader-driven recommendations circulating on social media. Communities built around reading culture transformed her catalog into a phenomenon that few authors experience in their careers. But the transition from best-selling author to the center of a Hollywood adaptation brought with it a completely different level of public scrutiny. The involvement of high-profile actors like Blake Lively and director-actor Justin Baldoni meant that the story was no longer confined to the literary world. Once the film premiered, the narrative surrounding the project expanded far beyond the themes of the book itself. Entertainment media, online commenters, and fans began dissecting everything from casting decisions to the ongoing legal dispute connected to the production.
In the interview, Hoover seemed aware of how dramatically the situation had evolved. At one moment, she acknowledged that there was a period when recommending It Ends With Us felt difficult because the legal drama and tabloid coverage had overshadowed the story itself. She described feeling uncomfortable discussing the novel during that time, even though it had been one of the most important works of her career. The constant headlines made it challenging to separate the creative project from the controversy surrounding it.
However, Hoover also indicated that her perspective has begun to shift. As time passed, she said it became easier to view the situation with some distance. Instead of focusing entirely on the legal conflict or the public debates, she has tried to remember the impact the story had on readers long before the film adaptation existed. For many people, the novel addressed topics that are rarely discussed openly, particularly the complexities of domestic abuse and the emotional difficulty of breaking destructive relationship cycles. According to Hoover, hearing from readers who felt seen or understood by the story has always been the most meaningful part of her career. Those responses, she explained, are what allow her to feel proud of the work even when the surrounding circumstances become messy or controversial. The reactions from audiences reminded her that the story's message reached people in ways that went far beyond the headlines. At the same time, the interview made it clear that the experience has changed how Hoover approaches public life. The intense spotlight surrounding the film and the legal battle created a situation where nearly every comment or appearance could become part of a larger online debate. As a result, she acknowledged becoming more cautious about how she participates in public conversations about her work. Looking forward, Hoover hinted that she would still like to see more of her novels adapted into films or television projects. The experience of watching a story move from page to screen, despite its complications, remains something she finds exciting. For an author, seeing characters and settings imagined privately come to life through actors, directors, and entire production teams can be both surreal and rewarding. But before any new adaptation happens, Hoover's focus appears to be returning to the basics, writing the next story. After years of rapid success, viral popularity, and unexpected controversy, she seems ready to reconnect with the quieter creative process that defined the early stages of her career. In many ways, the interview captured a moment of transition. Hoover is still one of the most recognizable authors in modern publishing, and her work continues to attract massive audiences. Yet, the events surrounding the It Ends With Us film adaptation have shown just how quickly a beloved story can become part of a much larger cultural conversation. And as that conversation continues to evolve, one thing remains clear. The intersection of literature, Hollywood, and internet culture has created a new kind of spotlight for authors, one where the story itself is sometimes only the beginning.